You know, on the note you just mentioned, Kalanit, I live in Colombia, and I understand that there is a Colombia in Canada. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let me should learn how to use this. It's not clicking. Why is it not clicking forward? Sorry. There we go. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on this presentation today. Today I am presenting alongside Dr. Kuldip, Senior Vice President of Research at the ALS Association. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jessica Mabe, Programs Coordinator for the International Alliance of ALS-MND Associations. Doesn't want to... There we go. So in this session, we want to share with you some of the data from the Fundamental Rights Survey for people living with ALS, MND, that was held by the Alliance in May and June of this year. We also want to explain to you why we have looked into the analysis of Global North and Global South countries, and we're still running through this data, so I might not have all the answers to your questions, but I'll try and give you a good taster of this all. We also want to highlight why building access to clinical trials in the Global South is important and what the Alliance is doing for this. There you go. The clicker and me will become friends by the end of this presentation. So, the International Alliance of ALS MND Associations, and this has gone way too far. There we go. Supports the fundamental rights for people living with ALS, MND, and caregivers of people living with ALS. And you can find these documents in the Alliance website. These rights are reviewed annually by the PALS and CALS Advisory Council. And this year, during the review, we did several changes, but I want to highlight two of them. The first one is that we now have the right to have the highest quality treatment available as right number 1. It used to be right number 2. And we made the right of the highest quality care available right number 2. And this doesn't mean that one is more important than the other. As I mentioned, the rights are reviewed annually, and the PCAC felt that this year having access to high-quality treatments was a very important topic. So we've put it as right number 1 just to emphasize this, and we will see what the review brings next year. At the Alliance, you will hear us also mention a lot about access. And this is because access is the number 1 problem. Wherever it is for treatments, healthcare, genetics counseling, genetics testing, and any of the other rights, you can actually see on the second image that we've got this bar graph that has numbers that are very low. The median is 52. So people living with ALS feel that the rights are not really being respected, and we have a lot of work to do there. But in today's sessions, we're going to focus on access to clinical trials. There we go. So why did we look at the Global South and the Global North? Many people use this term in developing nations, and various international agencies have different ways of categorizing. For example, the World Bank uses a 4-tier system for economics, but the concept of global north and south comes from the United Nations, and the concept simplifies the complexities of global geopolitics and economic disparities. The division between the global north and global south is often used in discussions about global inequality, and we think it helps illustrate the differences in the ALS-MND community around the world. And we have been able to see this from the data in the survey. In the 2021 survey, the question was asked, which of the following statements best describes your situation as it relates to clinical trials? The results in the 2021 survey highlighted that 38% of respondents were willing to participate in clinical trials, and in the future, they were willing to participate in clinical trials in the future, yet 36% stated that they had no access to clinical trials. This data is a small but informative sample of the global landscape highlighting the lack of access of clinical trials. We ran the survey this year from May and June. We had 1,927 participants from 54 countries. And you can see the results of the same question on screen. So we now have comparative data from 2021 and 2023. And you can see that 23% of respondents are either currently participating in a trial or have participated in a trial. And that there is an increase of 6% compared to from 2021 to 2023. In 2021, we had a 17% response. And we see once again that similar figures in this year's survey, where 36% would be willing to participate and 32% have no access to clinical trials. In the survey, we asked the question, which of the following statement best describes your situation as it relates to clinical trials? And the statements were, they could choose among, I am currently participating in a clinical trial. I have participated in a clinical trial in the past. I would be willing to participate in a clinical trial in the future. I have access to clinical trials, but I am not participating in one. And the last one, I have no access to clinical trials. We also found that there is a relationship between access to clinical trials and access to the best possible treatment outcomes. And respondents who agreed that they have access to quality treatments are significantly more likely to be participating in a clinical trial or to have participated one in the past. As part of our analysis plan for this survey, we posed the hypothesis of access remains the biggest issue for treatments, which we were able to confirm that it's true. With more clinical trials opening, the pool of candidates in the usual regions is becoming more limited, and underrepresented communities are being left behind. The figures on screen provide an indication of the 631 respondents in the global north and 255 in the global south. Although both low percentages, there still is a drastic gap with only 3% currently participating in a trial. 47% willing to participate, and 40% with no access to clinical trials. There are many people with ALS worldwide hoping to have an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, but currently this is just not an option because there's none of them in the region. We also posed the hypothesis that access to clinical trials, both currently and in the past, is higher in the global north. And the survey data showed that this is true. With only 3% in the global south currently participating in a clinical trial, 9% participated in a clinical trial in the past, and 40% from the global south stating that they had no access to clinical trials versus 29% in the global north. So with this, I'm going to invite my co-speaker to tell us a little bit more about why this is important.
I'm good. Thanks, Jessica. Hi, Kuldip, head of research at the ALS Association. If you remember last year when we met in San Diego, I talked about our approach to have more, better, faster trials in ALS. And we want more trials because we want more drugs tested. But to have more trials, you need to have more sites. In the United States at least, I think the average is still, for recruitment, 1 patient per site per month. And that's hasn't really changed in the last decade. And so what happens is when you have the same sites, and that's the ones that industry use for their trials, you're getting the same people. You're dipping into the same pool of people. And if you're going to the same sites, now that same site has to activate every time a new trial comes on. So they're slower because now they have to add more trials using the same number of staff that they have at their clinics. And so what happens when you are going with the same sites is that the diversity and inclusion is what suffers. If you're going to the same sites, mostly in the global north, then your population is not going to be racially or ethnically diverse or geographically diverse. And This is why it's important to have capacity and more trial sites in the Global South. And I was struck by the survey data that about a third of people don't have access to trials, and that hasn't changed in 2021 and 2023. So this initiative is really important because it's going to be important for diversity. It's going to make trials faster. And it's going to hopefully bring in the underrepresented communities within trial networks and infrastructure. So last year when I presented on our trial capacity program, I think somebody asked, well, why aren't you thinking about this internationally? So just to back up a little bit, the trial capacity program is where we are funding clinics to either become trial sites or, if they're trial sites already, to expand their capacity to do more trials. And the question was, well, why aren't you doing this internationally? And we had been thinking about that, and so was the Alliance. And Jessica and Kathy came to the ALS Association with an application which was reviewed and successfully funded to start to do a planning process in the Global South, mainly starting from Latin America, that Jessica will talk about in a minute, about trying to get that infrastructure together. How do we get sites in Latin America activated for ALS so that the industry doesn't have to just go to US or Europe sites, that there are more sites, and if there are more sites, then there will be more people, and we could have better, faster, and more trials. Thanks.
So what is the Alliance doing? So we are studying the landscape to identify champions and emerging networks. We are engaging with other networks to learn and understand their setup process. And we're also liaising with clinical trial representatives to identify an aspirational setup for clinical trial infrastructure. And we know that access is a major driver, and we would like to help move forward the setup of networks in regions in the Global South where there aren't any. So we are leveraging global collaboration with existing networks, and we are also supporting a secretariat emerging networks like ALS Africa and ELATAM for Latin America. And we will continue refining and looking and collecting data. And the goal of this project is to increase access to clinical trials for people living with ALS and MND. Although this presentation was focused in the Global South, our efforts are also being applied to other regions and communities with no access to trials. So thank you for your time, and we are ready for questions.
Right on time, and we're even looking at the minute notes there. So, who has? I'll see a hand up over here. We'll start back in there, then I'll go to Pablo, and come over this way. All right, do 2 or 3. Gotcha. All right.
Hi, thank you so much, and what an amazing effort. I have seen that regulators and lawmakers are starting to talk about mandating representation in trials. Would these international and that's in the U.S., I guess, would these international efforts suffice for those things? I'm not that much in the conversation, but curious. Thank you.
Do you want to take it? Yeah, that's a good question, Jean. So I think both the FDA and other regulators have put out kind of guidance on increasing diversity. I'd like to give an example, and not to pick on anybody here, but Biogen's Alzheimer's trial for aducanumab, I think had 98%, all white representation in I think 3 large trials. And again, it's not that Biogen was trying to discriminate actively. It's that just the way the infrastructure is set up and the sites that are set up, it just leads to that kind of, I think, selection of patients and participants into the trial. So I think you're right. I think having this guidance and having industry think about this, we actually did a roundtable on this where we thought about how to increase diversity and inclusion into our ALS trials and have people think about it.
Great. Thank you. Pablo?
Thank you. Well, Pablo from the International Alliance and also the ALS Association of Argentina. As part of an association from the Latin American region, I'm very excited to hear about this, and I am really excited to know that our alliance is getting involved in this and is driving clinical trials towards underrepresented regions. So you already anticipated a little bit of that, but which would be the next steps in order to move forward and to bring clinical trials to Latin America and other regions of the world, of course?
Yeah, so we're excited. The LATAM network has created a lot of impulse over the last few months. It literally is not even 6 months old. So it's starting to take momentum. They're planning their first symposia for next year. They're starting to organize with regards to the registry and where their focus is going to be. And then, once they're more structurally organized, they'll be in a position to have more of an offering for industry partners to be in a position to help with the setup of sites. So we're early days, but it's moving extremely quickly. So I'd say watch this space.
Jessica, can I?
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry, quickly. I think the issue, and this is what Jessica has been trying to do, is when you're trying to set up clinical infrastructure where there doesn't anything exist already, just having people having to agree to the protocols. I always like to say even simple things like collection of DNA. There isn't a protocol, that people are following in the same way. So collecting DNA, storing DNA. There's not even -80 freezers that can store that kind of DNA samples. So I think what the Alliance is doing is trying to bring together folks to first talk about what that consortium would look like and who it would include. The next step would be then protocols and how do you start to standardize. And then the third part would be actually doing it or executing on it.
And of course, you're very aware of the big challenge, which is the financial situation of a lot of these countries and a lot of these clinics. So that's another hurdle that we have to work towards. It's about how, we're going to get that infrastructure set up for clinical trials.
Great. Thank you both. I think there's a lot of interest in this. They will be here all week, but I have to actually move on. I'm sorry. So can you please help me thank Kuldip and Jess the timekeeper. She told me to keep on track.